We are doing it live. Welcome to our first live broadcast, inspired by Bill O'Reilly. If you have not seen that clip from Inside Edition,
Every time I hear that, I cannot stop laughing. I've heard that for 10 years at least now.
oh my goodness, that is the way to kick it off. Welcome to our first show. Of course, my name is Dylan. I'm one of your hosts, joined by Max down below, and our friend and fellow Diamond Dog, James O'Neill. Welcome back, James. We have a ton of flight advice to get to tonight. But of course, I wanted to start out by saying, you guys are on the road, right? You're joining us from hotels. I know we've got pilots, professional pilots in the audience today, and I'm curious if anyone is sharp enough to identify what type of hotel chain.
Mart?
Yeah. What type of hotel chain
this is my living room.
Yeah.
I put a big piece of marble up on
yeah.
the wall. I don't know if you noticed, but isn't it?
So drop a comment in there if you have an idea where Max is, what hotel chain Max is in, and where James is at. And if you get it right, we'll send you some swag. So
nobody's going to guess where I'm at.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see.
It's all fancy right. And off-brand.
Boutique hotels only for James.
Yeah.
All right, folks, we are going to be answering your questions live. Of course, some folks already submitted some questions, so we're going to get into a couple of those now. We'll give you a chance to submit your questions for James and Max. And I'm just going to kind of play the host of moderator today. Everyone knows my advice is pretty weak. So let's get right into it with the first question, and go ahead and drop those comments in, and we'll get to those in a little bit. All right, producer Joel is running the show, and let's go. Okay. Number one, this is a classic question we are getting so often. Hey guys, current military pilot getting ready to retire in the next couple of years. Currently thinking about Delta, United, NetJets, or corporate. Flying wide-body aircraft intrigues me. What are some of the non-obvious questions I should be asking to help me figure out where to go? James, I imagine you're getting this question pretty often.
We are. And the interesting thing about it is when people say wide body aircraft intrigues me, typically the first thing that I ask is it actually flying a 777 or a 74, which unfortunately all the guys missed all the fun conversations about 74 flying before we hopped on. But is it the actual flying the wide body, or is it the actual type of flying the long haul international? So if you think about it, right? Let's say you're flying for a legacy airline. Actually, now folks are doing non-legacy airlines into Western Europe. But, let's say you're talking about a trip into Western Europe. Are you interested in taking off at, let's call it 5 p.m. on a Monday, getting there about 7 to 9 hours later, hanging out for about 36 hours, and then coming back? Or are you looking at getting in front of the Global or a Gulfstream, flying over there, and then hanging out and fishing or doing whatever you're doing for 3 or 4 or 5 days? Even up to, we have clients on certain corporate operators where the family basically plans a trip to Europe every year for 1 or 2 months, and they basically the pilots take their families with them, right? So when we talk about, it's pretty cool, and a lot of folks don't think about that. But, when we talk about that wide body flying, is it, hey, look, I'm looking to go to London and go to, be there for 36 hours and get to do one thing and then come back? Or, hey, I want to go to Tokyo, and like I said, you're going to get, to do maybe 1 or 2 of the same things all the time and then come back? Or are you looking at that more the international lifestyle where you get an opportunity to kind of experience certain things while you're over there for a period of time? So that's the first thing I ask when it comes into wide body flying. The second part of it is really taking a look at what do you want your lifestyle to look like? Is the wide body about the prestige and the, hey, look, I've done it, and kind of the status aspect of it? And by the way, that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. But the reason why I bring that up is because honestly, a lot of folks need to ask themselves, you're 65 years old, you're looking in the mirror, and you're looking back at your career and your life. Are you going to feel sadness or resentment when you look back and go, man, I never flew a 74, I never flew a 777 or a 787, right? If that's the case, you kind of got to go do it. You don't necessarily have to do it permanently, but you're probably going to have to, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, I got to check the box off, right? To say I did it, kind of have that sense of accomplishment. So if it's status driven, then it's really hard to kind of get that fixed without actually doing it. But if it's lifestyle driven, then it becomes a little bit more of a complex conversation where we start taking a look at Especially when you take a look at like a NetJets, where those guys have for international pilots, they got a really good quality of life, right? You take a look at certain Part 91 flight departments where you get a really good quality of life. Then kind of that formula starts to change a bit. So that's kind of the first thing that I talk to people about sitting down and thinking about is, why do you want to do that? Is it lifestyle driven? Is it, hey, look, box checking driven? But what's driving that? Because then that's going to lead you into whether or not corporate or airlines are the way to go on there.
And I think another important consideration with that too is you talked about that hypothetical scenario where you fly, to Western Europe for 9 hours, hang out for 36 hours. But what if you had to commute in 6 hours before that and hang out in the crew room before that 9-hour flight? And so if you live somewhere where none of the airlines you listed have a pilot domicile for wide bodies at that, or, then maybe NetJets or something in a domicile city where you eliminate commuting from the equation. Cause I can't, and I think some of the military pilots too, don't have as good of an understanding of the lifestyle hit that commuting takes, versus maybe people that came up through the regionals and have seen and had people sit on their jump seats that commuted. So, I think that is definitely a huge consideration, is anything you can do to be able to drive to work is going to enhance your lifestyle substantially.
So the other thing that folks don't kind of think about when it comes to the airline side of the house, and this kind of depends on whether or not you have kids or not, but I was kind of a nerdy kid growing up. I know that shocks you guys.
You don't say, James, huh?
I know.
Wow. I didn't see that one coming.
I remember when I was really young, there were a couple of family vacations where I happened to be learning something in school. And so that's where my parents planned on us to go to vacation, right? So you think about, you're a wide body international pilot. And as your kid's going through school and as your kid's learning things, you can actually take your kid on the flight, bring them over to that country, show them some cultural things, some history things, whatever that is, right? There are experiences that you can weave into that you're only going to get at an airline that you're not going to get anyplace else. So really understanding the why behind you want to do that matters.
Well, and I think Chris here in the comments really sums it up by saying, we have unfilled narrow body captain vacancies at United because right seat wide body flying is like crack.
Dozing for dollars. Yep. I know they call it at some airlines, right? He also had a good point. You better be able to sleep on a jet if you're going to do that, right? I know one of my friends.
You're a food movie critic. I mean,
yeah, exactly. My
you are. That's what you're doing.
I had a buddy at United that was doing it on the 787, and he said, because I guess the relief officer is responsible for the walk around, and so the big debate
and getting the blankets and pillows.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the big debate was whether you needed to put your uniform on to do the walk around, or if you could do it in your pajamas because you're going right to the bunk. So that comes into call, the professionalism that we have in this industry.
These are the tough decisions you got to make as a wide body international pilot.
Yeah. So I don't know. Did we answer anything for this military pilot? I think really it comes down to there's a lot.
It starts with the why. It really starts with the why. And the big thing that folks are having trouble with right now is honestly staring in the face at $500,000 a year and saying, hey, I'm not going to go do that. The appeal of the lifestyle of corporate is what gets people thinking about that direction. But then the reality of, my buddy next door is making $400,000 or $500,000 a year, and I'm making half of that. That's where the rub comes in. And, so you got to kind of ask yourself, what is the dollar amount that I'm willing to place on my quality of life? And it turns out you can actually kind of calculate that. But it can be tough to give up $250,000, $300,000 a year to have a good quality of life for some people.
Yeah. It's well said. All right. Anything else on this one, Max?
No. What's next?
Let's see. I
feel Bill O'Reilly coming on.
Yeah, I know.
I know. Quickly.
We could see. Where is the teleprompter?
Whatever it is, it's not right on the teleprompter. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that.
Okay, this is another interesting one. We got, it says, my partner and I, both military pilots, are planning to transition into civilian flying. We're considering two options: both join major carriers for stability, or my partner joins a major carrier while I pursue a corporate aviation career. We're seeking insights on scheduling considerations, especially with regards to stability when children are involved, as I value a stable schedule but find the Part 91 job exciting.
Cool. So let's talk about, so first of all, okay. So I would highly recommend you don't both work for the same company. Cause when everything's going great, it's great, but man, if anything goes wrong, right, you're both in a really bad situation at the same time. So 2010, NetJets decides they're going to go through and they're going to start laying folks off. They actually laid office employees off before they laid off the pilots. And they actually did it on September 11th, 2009. And Eileen was working there at the time and narrowly, I mean, like super narrowly made it through and didn't get laid off. A month later, I got my layoff notice. So if you're both working at the same carrier at the exact same time, if something goes bad at that carrier financially, you can end up going from making $1 million a year to $0 a year pretty quick, right? So first thing is, give some serious consideration to flying for different carriers. Now, there are some downside, or there's obviously some benefits to flying for the same carrier in terms of being able to fly together and so on and so forth. But you really got to weigh that out depending on if you have pensions and what are your savings and so on and so forth going into it. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is one of you is probably going to have to choose a job based on flexibility.
Yeah.
So that they can meet the schedule of the other. So I happen to have some friends where both spouses are pilots, right? And there is a give and take in that, right? There are different career goals that they swap out for each other in terms of not upgrading or not taking a certain position because it's going to keep them separate longer. So when you take a look at, and we can use Southwest as an example where you have super flexibility on scheduling that you're not necessarily going to get in the same way or to the same level at, let's say, United, Delta, or American. So making sure you're clear on, okay, regardless of what we choose, whether one chooses corporate, one chooses airlines, we both choose airline, but we choose separate airlines, or we both choose airlines and we choose the same airline. Where is that give and take going to be so that we can maintain the lifestyle that we want? Otherwise, you're both bidding opposite schedules. So somebody's with kids all the time while the other one's out on the road flying, and you're basically not really living a life together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's going to be tough any way you cut it. We had some people that we knew that worked at NetJets, and they just bid the opposite schedule. And it was for a while, it was a high five, coming through the door. All right, see you in a week. Yeah, and that was like obviously a very difficult and non-sustainable way to have a family. So, to James' token, find something with the maximum amount of flexibility and not in the same.
At least.
I mean, maybe even the different segments too. I mean, being corporate and airlines, or even in a cargo carrier or something like that, just to diversify. I think because as good as things are, they're not always as good. And
the difficulty is, imagine you both work for a Part 91 flight department, right? That you're on call 24/7, or 135, 91 doesn't matter, but you're on call 24/7, 365, and you don't your schedule more than 12 hours in advance, right? That's a really tough way to live a lifestyle. Imagine if you're both at legacy carriers, sitting reserve, commuting to outside bases. That's a really tough way to live a lifestyle. So there are factors that go into that in terms of really understanding what do we want our life to look like that will help steer down a very clear path. I was talking to a guy earlier today who flies a King Air, Part 91 aircraft owner. And I think last year he flew 98 hours and was gone 15 days for the entire year. He overnighted 15 days, right? So you think about a job like that, like, man, that's a really great corporate job, right? Super stable, no scheduling way in advance, not gone very much, right? But he's not going to make $300,000 a year doing that. He's going to sit in that 120 to 180 range pretty consistently.
Yeah.
But one of the trade-offs I made when I went from being a Part 91 corporate pilot to an airline pilot is you may not fly as much and maybe you don't spend as many days away, but when the jet needs to fly, you got to be there to fly it. Where at the airlines, you have, the numbers where you have options. You can trade with the company, you can trade with other pilots, you can drop it. You can, there's you have a lot more options if you need to be home. And as Dylan can tell you too, as a Part 91 corporate pilot, even if you don't fly that much, the only way to guarantee you're going to fly is to plan something, to have your kid's birthday or whatever. And then all of a sudden, everything's falling into place. This is all going to work out. And then boom.
Boom.
It just, I don't know if it feels like that or it actually always happens, but that's sure how it felt.
It's just because everybody always wants to do things at the same time. That's what I found. You know, one other thing I wanted to throw in there is when they talk about scheduling certainty in that scenario, the fractionals, when you get that 7 on 7 off, you know that for
it's the most
year.
fractionals. 7 on 7 off schedule at a fractional is the most predictable schedule you will ever have.
Yeah.
And I was talking to another guy last night, a NetJets pilot, about it. And he goes, look, the hardest thing to give up is that 7 on 7 off. He goes, I know I can plan everything with my kids. I can plan everything with my wife. You can plan everything and you can look a year out. People forget with the airlines, yeah, you have a schedule, but you're getting it basically by the 20th of the month before, and it's changing every month. Yes, as you gain seniority, that schedule becomes more predictable, so on and so forth. But depending on the aircraft that you choose, the base that you have, the company that you go to, that could be months, it could be years. And so really having a firm grasp on what commitment do we need from each other for availability and time is really going to drive that decision. And you're probably going to sacrifice certain career goals to make it work.
Yeah, 100%.
I can't guarantee that, but I would be prepared to have the conversation of who wants to sacrifice what.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, well, we got a ton of comments to get to, so let's jump in. Philip White is the first winner for some swag. He identified Max in the Marriott right away. Boom.
Very
good
quickly.
work, Philip.
Absolutely. There was no doubt.
Philip, send us an email, info@215podcast.com, and give us your address, and we'll send you something. Also, your wife wrote in, James.
Well, she made the book.
And she cheated.
Genius.
She cheated. So you send us some Raven swag, Eileen. Also want to shout out Timothy P. Pope in the audience, another Diamond Dog. He shared some of the bad advice that I usually give people, which is fake it until you make it. Thank you for reminding me of that painful memory, Tim. Appreciate that. Thank you so much. Couple other comments. One came in from Jason, and he's got a question for us. He says, I'm a mid-40s student pilot going for my ATP and is wondering what the process is when at the majors to upgrade from narrow body FO to wide body FO. Or is it possible to go from regional FO to wide body FO?
Yeah. So look, everything's seniority based, right? And depending on what's going on at the carrier, you might have the opportunity to bid wide body FO straight out of initial training. We've certainly, at both just the past week, both Delta and United folks taking a look at what do they want to do the wide body versus the narrow body straight as an FO after they get there. There's some different variables that go into that calculation. A lot of folks don't necessarily consider the fact that you may be able to bid the wide body, but if that company does not have a lot of experience putting new hires in that wide body aircraft, the training's probably not designed for you, right? So, when you take a look at a 737 or an A320 or a 717 or some of the single aisle domestic airplanes, right, where historically they've been putting more junior pilots into for the past, 100 years, right? They've got training departments that are structured for that. Having someone go to a legacy carrier and go straight into a wide body is a relatively new thing, right? So the training programs that they have been designed for people that have been at that company for 5 years or 10 years. There's certain assumptions they make about, do you understand certain company policies and procedures and how Boeing system works or Airbus system works or so on and so forth. So the first is when you get that opportunity right off the bat, you really want to ask yourself, hey, am I ready for that? And is the training program structured for the way that I learned? I say that because we've certainly had folks who have put in the hard work to get a job at a carrier, pick a wide body and not make it through training. A lot of the carriers are very honest about it. Look, the program's not necessarily designed for you. The other thing is, okay, yeah, you can bid wide body or you can get wide body FO right out of training. But if all of a sudden people are constantly coming in, because remember, it's seniority based. So just because you got the airplane this month and somebody else got it 6 months from now, if their seniority number is senior to you, guess what? You never move. You just keep going down the list.
That's what audience member Chris just said. He said you could go. Yeah. United people are putting people on the 777 and 78 right now, but you'll be on reserve for forever.
Yeah, that's the thing. The one thing that hasn't changed even this market is that the wide body FOs as a whole are more senior than the narrow body FOs. That's not going to change right away. And it's the same as upgrading to captain in a year at a lot of these carriers. You can, but you will be very junior for a very long time.
But think about, so you go straight into the wide body, right? Let's say you're one of those folks that's really fortunate, right? Timing works out exactly correct. As soon as you get restricted ATP minimums, you go straight to a regional airline, right? So between 750 and 1,000 hours, you go to a regional, right? You fly exactly 1,000 hours at a regional, and boom, you get hired into a legacy carrier, right? So now you basically have somewhere between 1,800 and 2,000 hours total time, right? You may have some total have been in the industry flying professionally for 3 to 5 years, right? And now you're like, oh, I'm going to go right to the triple, right? I'm going to go to A330. Okay, great. And now you end up being the international relief officer. So you never get to touch a set of flight controls. So now you're doing the pre-flights and getting the pillows, right? But you're not getting that repetition. You're not getting the time in the seat. You're not getting the reps, right, of takeoffs and landings and just experience in the airplane. You're sitting there watching, and you keep losing relative seniority in the fleet type as people keep coming in over you. And it can create a situation where you kind of robbed yourself of the opportunity to develop some judgment skills, decision-making skills, problem solving, so on and so forth, because you're just in an airplane that you're not really doing a ton on other than watching in cruise.
You guys are real downers, you know. Here's another way to look at this. Say you're like, this didn't used to be an option as a 25-year-old or 26-year-old. So if you do that and you go to a junior base, oftentimes New York, right, is always a junior wide body base, and you get your studio apartment in the city, and you can have a pretty good setup too, with a lot of days off, and you could be right in the mix and tell everyone you're a 777 FO. Could work in your favor.
The other thing to think about with that, though, is if you want to take an immediate upgrade, right? So let's say you get hired by a carrier and you're going, look, I want to take the first available upgrade. Bidding the airplane that you think you can upgrade on gives you that experience. It gives you that experience and watching other captains do it. So you don't bid the triple or A330, and then all of a sudden a year later, you're going through an A320 course as a captain. So now you're a captain on a brand new airplane, and maybe you've never been a captain before. The first time some of these people are going to be captains is going to be at a legacy carrier. So there's certain variables that go into thinking through, hey, look, what do I want my career to look like? If you're saying, hey, look, I want to sit on wide body for 3 to 5 years, yeah, fine, go straight in as an FO on a wide body. But you just got to kind of think through, hey, look, what do I want my next 1 or 2 steps to be, so you can put yourself in a position to be successful at that.
Yeah. All right. Another question from the audience. This one from Jab. He says, he or she says, can you speak specifically about the schedule flexibility at Southwest versus United that James mentioned? There might be some people that know something about that on the panel.
I can speak very confidently about half of that, but the other half I don't really know. So go ahead, James. You take it and I'll chime in.
Well, so we're talking about the difference between so there's a couple of different things overarching that go into the difference in the flexibility. So the first is, how do the reserve rules work? Right? Do you have to be within a certain distance of the airport? Don't have to be within, is there a 2-hour call out, 18-hour call out? Do you have what's called short call reserve, which is basically you need to be there. Let's just use 2 hours as a number, versus long call reserve. Hey, you have 12 hours, 16 hours, 18 hours to get to the airport. And the second thing is, can you pick up trips in different bases, right? Can you sit reserve in different bases, or you have to sit reserve only in the base that you're in? And then what is the ability to pick up and drop trips? And that's really where I would, from my perspective, the magic at Southwest is the ability to pick things up and as that one commercial says, pick them up and put them down, right? It's the ability to pick things up and then drop them or trade them. And so Max, if you want to kind of talk about the specifics, kind of how that works at Southwest, I think that'll kind of help them understand, hey, look, what does a max flexibility schedule look like?
Well, the first thing you have to realize is it's an airline of over 10,000 pilots that all fly the same airplane. So that in and itself gives you a lot more flexibility. It's all the same airplanes at all the bases, and you can fly any of those airplanes at any base. So that starting there, you're a big leg up. But essentially what you have the ability to do is it's not so much on reserve, because the real flexibility happens when you can hold a line, but you can trade with trips that are constantly coming available through that the company has. There's other pilots can post trips. And so if I call it playing the game, where it's not, you can't just be like, I don't feel like going to work tomorrow. I'll just trade this for Friday. It doesn't really work like that. But if you have some sort of strategy and ability, and there's text alerts that you can sign up for. So when a trip that does meet your criteria shows up, you can, be Johnny on the spot and log in and trade it and things. But at the end of the day, I haven't flown. I don't fly 90% of the trips that I'm awarded in the bid, because I move them all around to stuff that's better, or because I'm not that senior, and I only want to work on Wednesday morning, Thursday, and get done Friday afternoon. And I'm almost 100% successful at doing that. And that's because of the ability to move all the stuff around. And then to make yourself doubly successful, I've trained my wife on how to do this too. So she gets the same text alerts, and she can jump on and do it.
CRM.
So, yeah, exactly. So you got to use all your available resources.
Yeah.
She works from home and has a computer on a lot of days. So, so I don't know how it is everywhere else, so it's hard for me to speak to that. But the
we just have a comment that just popped in from a United pilot, and it sounds like you can just read it yourself. It says it's not as flexible, I would say, and I think you mentioned that, James. Like, probably Southwest has the reputation right now for being the most flexible.
And it goes to what Max said. When you have one fleet type with everyone trained on the exact same airplane, the reason, so scheduling and pay are the two biggest questions that pilots have. How does it work?
Yep.
And the difficulty with it is there is so much nuance to scheduling, and there is so much nuance to pay, that the way that we do it is when folks come in the door, we either use some networking training that we give in terms of meeting people if they don't already know people there, or we go through and we map out specific questions to ask. So you can go to someone that works at that specific carrier and say, hey, look, if I was going to be based here, if I was going to be flying to this airplane, how would I adjust the schedule or flex the schedule to meet my needs? When you go about it from that perspective, you end up being able to figure out, hey, look, what companies are going to work for you and what companies are not.
Everybody's wife is chiming in there right now.
Yeah. This is not for you guys.
Yeah, come on. We should see as if she's willing to, subcontract her skills and start a little mentoring group for new hires.
No, we're good. We'll
do it live.
All right.
No. We'll do it live.
But and the other thing too,
I'll write it and we'll do it live.
The other thing that I want to mention too is that and I don't, again, know how it is everywhere else, but at Southwest, you do have the opportunity to work a lot more if you want to and scale your income, or you can just work less, and you can actually trade for trips with less value. And so the flexibility too, not just on the days you want to work and the trips you want to fly, but also how hard you want to work, and which therefore equals how much money you want to make is another option, because there's people of the same seniority that have very different income levels based on how much they want, how motivated.
Yeah, but think about it this way, Max. What's the max amount of flying you can drop every month?
Oh, well, honestly, right now to just drop it is like, not much, but you can, if you're sly about it, you can turn 3 days into 2 days into 1 day. And so you can drop here and there, but you can't just clear it all off. I don't feel like working this month.
But contractually speaking, if there was someone that wanted to take it from you, you could do that, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not every carrier allows that. And so there's, so there's nuance in there in terms of, hey, look, what type of flexibility are you looking for? Is it like you were saying, Max, you're trying to turn 3 days into 2 days? Are you trying to do 3 days versus 4 days? Are you trying to block your time together so you can go out and fly 10, 12 days straight and then have the rest of the month off? Are you looking to fly mostly nights, mostly days?
Yeah.
The scheduling stuff is so unique to each person. The most effective way to do it is to grab somebody at the company and start talking with them, and they'll physically show you their schedule, and they'll show you, here's how I would actually get what you want, and here's how long it would take to get what you want. And once you do that, you can see pretty quick, hey, look, the level is the level of flexibility the contract offers right for me, not is it as flexible or whatever somebody else might need.
Well said.
I think to put a bow on it, another big thing is your flexibility and your ability to trade and drop and do all that is going to be living in base is important. Are you living in a base, one of the biggest bases on your fleet type? I think that's also huge too. Are you at a super small base with only a few lines? You know, I've always said, like, if you want to have the best quality of life, you would go like just commit to living in Atlanta and working for Delta, or living in Dallas, or maybe Phoenix for Southwest. But being in a base with a huge fleet is always going to give you more options to trade. All right, next one. I am currently at Southwest as a captain in the training department. Been here for a couple of years, more than average due to our new rates. I'm making a bit over $40K a month. Now, I just got an offer from my dream airline, Southwest, and have even thought, and even though this is my dream job, not sure if I should leave. Right now, I am home every night, have all the holidays and days off I want, and making too much money, and money I don't think I'll be able to make at Southwest. What do you recommend?
That's exactly why the regionals have done what they've done. Look, you're talking about making $500,000 a year and going back to 90 to go work at the carrier that you want to. The big variable that pops up with this, especially with the regionals, is, look, we all know airline contracts are for a period of time, right? 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, you know, depending on when they sign their contracts, right? But and Tim Pope does bring actually a really good example. So I'm going to drag him in here because he's the guy that we actually send folks to when it comes to the financial planning aspect of this. But this is a short-term versus a long-term game, right? So the question is, how long do you think the regional airlines are going to pay pilots $500,000 a year to fly regional jets, right? I mean, that is a very difficult model to maintain long-term profitably. If anything goes wrong in the economy, right? The easiest ones to pull that stuff back from are the regionals. I'm not saying you can't pull it away from a legacy pilot, but it is much more difficult to. And so taking a look at how old are you? What are your financial goals? What are your actual career goals? Like, do you care if you ever fly? Back to that original question of wide body aircraft or not, is really what's going to drive that. Now, Tim brings up a really good point about going through with a financial planner, specifically somebody that's familiar with the aviation industry and contracts, right? And having them walk through, what would this look like financially if I stayed? What would it look like if I left? And you can throw in different assumptions into there and try and get an idea on what would the financial cost of this be. It is very difficult, though, to give up the money and give up the quality of life for the prestige in the short term. It becomes easier when you look at it from a long-term play.
Yeah. How long can you make $40K a month at SkyWest?
What if you said, I'm going to make $40K a month at SkyWest until they stop paying me, and then I'll jump over and I don't care how much seniority I've lost? I understand there's a lot of people that may say, hey, that's a horrible idea, but it depends on what your financial goals are.
Yeah.
It depends on, do you have a pension from someplace else? Do you not? Do you have a business? Do you not? It's not as much of a one size fits all as people think. And it becomes a lot harder to take that pay cut the older you get.
I think what pilots oftentimes don't realize is you can actually quantify these things on paper with spreadsheets with people that know. And it's not, I think a lot of people, when it comes to the money and the long-term, they're kind of taking a swag at it and saying, you know, well, this seems like it fits about right. But you really can quantify these things quite accurately if you talk to the right people. So we would always recommend that.
Yeah, 100%. All right. More comments coming in here. Aaron wants to know any insight on Delta's reserve and bidding, like y'all were mentioning for Southwest and United.
No. Next question.
Yeah.
Well, but let's actually put that back up here for a second. So when we see questions like this, right, it seems like a really, really, really direct question. But once again, it goes back to what base, what aircraft type, and what do you want your quality of life to look like? So a lot of these questions seem deceptively simple, but that's why when we work with folks on this, we put them in contact with people directly so they can actually map out and show them, here is exactly how you would get what you want to get. In general, though, when you take a look at the legacy carriers, Delta has amazing work rules, comparatively speaking, right? It's different when you bring Southwest into that mix. But when you take a look at Delta's work rules, especially in their new contract, they're really impressive. They really are.
And that's the other thing. You brought up a good point with their new contract. You have to realize all of these rules could change because almost all the big airlines are in contract negotiations.
Yeah, but one of the things that, because you bring up a good point about how contracts can change, that is correct. But this is where pairing up with folks that have long history in the business matters, right? This is where kind of our strength comes in, because if you have access to resources that can talk about what contract negotiations have looked like over the years. We were joking around with this last night when we were talking about some of the previous episodes we did together, right? But if everyone goes back to the coronavirus, right? Remembers when we were doing our 2005 episodes, I had guys on our team talking to union folks that were at U.S. Airways and American in the 80s doing contract negotiations. So we could get an idea on, hey, how were the airlines going to react? What were they going to do? So on and so forth. Each carrier has its own culture, and you can see the things that pilots fight for and really don't want to give up and things they are willing to give up. And so, yes, contracts do change, but it really does help to get in touch with the right people so you understand the culture and the history of the company in terms of like, hey, look, what are the things that pilots are going to go run to the hill on with flaming swords and fight for? And what are the things where when they go to take it away, they're going to go, it was good while it lasted, but we don't have it anymore.
Every pilot group has those things that they're non-negotiable that people
exactly.
And you know what, James, it reminds me of during those coronavirus episodes, what did you teach people? It's how to network online, right? Especially in LinkedIn. And so for folks that are listening right now, they're probably going, well, I don't know anyone at Delta maybe. And LinkedIn, which we're broadcasting on right now, is one of those great tools. And you guys have specific training on how to actually make those connections and start to be able to have those conversations.
We get on and screen share the LinkedIn profile and write the messages with them, right? And we show them how to write messages that are not canned, that are genuine, that you can use repeatedly to get a conversation started, because that's the hardest part. The hardest part is the approach. It's how do you get the conversation started? Once someone's in a conversation, they can carry it on their own, no problem, right? Yeah. It's the getting the conversation started. Yeah, we'll sit down with you one-on-one. We'll actually help you write the messages. And they work.
Can be done.
Like really well.
Just like having a good pickup line at the bar. Just got to get the conversation started.
That's right.
If you were a booger, I'd pick you first.
Oh, God. And that's how James got his wife.
Yeah. Lucky gal she is.
Right, Eileen? I can't wait for her comment next.
Yeah. About to get eviscerated. I think I have to go.
Yeah, that's right. This is it. Last live appearance for James. It was great
exactly. One and only.
Okay. Mock Jesus writes in and he says, can you provide any general insight as to how checkride failures may impact career progression? Scenario is a CFI with 1,000 hours, restricted ATP, and 3 failures. Goal is 121 flying.
I come on and do a live with you, and now I'm getting rejected by my own wife live. Thanks, guys.
This is progressing well.
Okay, so checkride failures. So the reality is there is almost nothing you can have in your background that we haven't seen. And I won't go into specifics just because we at Raven sign confidentiality agreements with all the clients that we work with. It's one of the ways that we guarantee their comfortability in terms of sharing information with us, that they know, hey, look, we're not going to take their information and share it publicly. Okay. So that's the first thing. So we sign confidentiality agreements. So I could talk in generalities, but I can't talk like, hey, this specific person. DUIs, criminal convictions, terminations, dishonorable discharges, other than honorable discharges, checkride failures, multiple checkride failures, right? And the list goes on and on and on of things of clients that we've worked with that have that are at legacy carriers. So the bottom line up front is it is not going to limit you in the slightest. Now, When we talk about checkride failures, there are a couple of things to be aware of. So the first is recency does matter with certain carriers. There are kind of the unofficial term is like a second chance carrier. There are certain carriers that are second chance carriers. Basically, hey, you trip and fall, get right back up. Hey, look, man, we're going to give you the shot right now. There are other carriers that are a little bit more conservative, meaning they want to see a year or 24 months between the checkride failure. That is individual to each carrier. I won't go in and list every one of them, but we know which ones are going to give you the chance, which ones are going to want.
That's for our premium subscribers. If you want to get that list, we'll be happy to sell that to you.
Well, yeah, it'd be the next hour and a half of me talking about what
Yeah.
each of the individual carriers do hiring wise to go into that. So, okay, so that's first. The second component of it is they're looking at trend, right? So did you fail your private, your instrument commercial, and your CFI, right? Did you fail none of your primary training and fail 3 type ratings, right? Like they're looking for what is the trend? What is the connecting piece here? The CFI has such a high failure rate that it is, I'm gonna be careful on how I say this, because if it's handled incorrectly, it is a deal breaker. It can be a deal breaker. But for the most part, you'll watch most of the recruiters go, oh, you failed your CFI? Yeah, okay, whatever. They don't even ask any questions about it, right? As long as it's written up properly and you're prepared to talk about it in 60 seconds or less, it's kind of a nothing burger, if that makes sense. The big problem that folks are running into is, number one, they're not putting it on the application. They're getting creative with how they're reading the application. And it's difficult because each individual carrier, especially now that the carriers have been kind of spearheading creating their own applications. Everyone saw probably American opened up their own now new internal application here last week. United has theirs. FedEx has it, right? The carriers are kind of going to their own individual applications. Each carrier asks checkride failure questions differently. So you can have one CFI checkride failure, and some carriers are going to want to see it. Some carriers are not going to want to see it. So it gets confusing with folks. Should I be disclosing it? Should I not be disclosing it? The next is when they get into the interview, it's shame and embarrassment typically, and they don't want to talk about it. And what happens is when we get ashamed, when we get embarrassed, the body language that we give off, talking in generalities, talking in circles, giving really large amounts. Yeah, a lot. Yeah, exactly. Not making eye contact, a large amount of background story without me actually understanding what's going on. It's the same way it looks when someone's lying. It just looks deceptive. I'm not saying that people are lying. I'm saying it looks the same to the recruiter, right? And so what happens is they show up to the interview with a shovel and they just dig. Instead of using a very simple format where you give them a bottom line up front and then you give them the context and you hit them with exactly what they need. So you build trust and rapport with your answer in the first 30 seconds, and then you can kind of run with it. And what happens when you do that is the emphasis shifts from being on the failure to the what did you learn from it? How did it change how you do things today? And that's really where I want the conversation going, right? So if you got arrested for stealing socks from a Walmart when you were in college, right? That in itself is not a deal breaker. Lying about it on an application, lying about it in an interview, or not being able to talk about it confidently, those are deal breakers.
Well, we've also talked about with other people about how you bring that subject to light in the interview. And if you do it right, then you kind of control the narrative versus sheepishly answering whatever questions are asked of you, right?
You do. And depending, so when somebody has an issue in their background, the first thing we do is we actually book out a session with them and we pull all the paperwork and we go through it to make sure we factually understand what happened. You'd be surprised how many times the paperwork does not necessarily match exactly what happened. I remember one of my guys reached out and he's trying to write the explanation for why a guy failed his check ride. And I said, well, what did the guy fail for? And he goes, everything. I go, you can't fail for everything. That's not actually how it works. Like there's a PTS and now it's an ACS, but there's task items. There's what task items did he fail? Comes back and he goes, guy said he failed for everything. I go, okay, you can't do that. Get a copy of the notice of disapproval and send it to me. freaking examiner wrote failed everything on the actual thing, right? Like you see dumb things where you're like, okay, the paperwork's not going to match what you're going to say in the interview because you can't. How do you show up to the interview? You go, what'd you fail for? Everything.
Did you try to dispute that?
Yeah. So the first is we start with the paperwork. We help folks run background checks. We help them pull paperwork. There's a lot of different tricks we can do kind of behind the scenes to make sure you get those records. There's a lot of times where people can't get records because they don't exist anymore. So we can kind of piece things together. Okay. Once you have that, you've got to do the write-up in a very specific way so that when the recruiter's reading it, because remember, when you show up to the interview, they grab all your stuff before they pull you into the interview and they're reviewing it. They're reviewing the application, your logbooks, reviewing all that, right? You can write it up in a certain way so that when you walk into the room, the recruiter already knows what happened. We physically write it for you. We don't have you write it, send it to us, and we proofread it. We write it for you. We send it to you. You proofread it, say, hey, it's accurate. We then have a background process where it goes through 2 other pilots that read it before it gets posted onto your application. And then we actually tell you specifically what questions to post that onto. Once that's done, now it comes a matter of, okay, we know what they're going to see when they walk into the interview. They're going to see this before you even start talking. So now you're walking into the interview from a position of power as opposed to on your heels going, shoot, when's this going to come up?
Drop, yeah.
Then we talk about the 4 different places that background issue can pop up in an interview, right? And now we start talking about, what areas do you have control of when it pops up? What areas do they have control of when it pops up? And how do you leverage those opportunities? Sometimes the recruiters will throw you a softball, tell me about a time question, so that you can talk about that issue in a very comfortable way. You need to be looking for those. We had a guy missed one, and he was so nervous. He went into the interview, and the recruiter asked him, "Tell me about a time question," and he gave a customer service one. The guy goes, "I think you probably got a better one. How about that failure over there?" Right? Guy threw him a softball. So when they throw you the softball, hit it. Right? Take advantage of that. So you need to know, we don't want any surprises in the interview. You need to know where that stuff is going to pop up, how it's going to pop up, what all the resources are the recruiters have to bring those up. And then how do you talk about that in a comfortable and confident way? It's also the reason that why when we do interview prep with people, we video record everything so they can watch themselves back and fit, like we're pointing out the body language so they can watch back and go, oh, yeah, that's where it is. And then we have them take their phone and they record it over and over and over and over and over again. And then they listen to it back. And then we come and we practice it again and again and again. And we have 2 or 3 people observe them doing it. So they're getting multiple pieces of feedback. There's a process to it so that by the time, remember when you did your first V1 cut and your hands were shaking after that engine failure? And after about the 10th one, you're like, oh, I just got to do these 3 things and it's fine. It's the same way it works for the interview prep. You can talk about it so many times that when you walk in, doesn't cause anxiety.
That's good stuff. We got to move along. We've got a couple more we got to get to before we get to the rapid fire session here. Nick's asking us, a lot of my older mentors are bragging about the airlines because of the money. Do you think that corporate will eventually keep up with pay, or do I have to sacrifice pay for quality of life?
Well, that's the $1 million question right there.
Oh, yeah. Here's the answer. It's very quick. Just get your pen, Nick. Here it is. Just go to Sun Country. That's it. All right, next question. Next question. Move on.
So there are 100% corporate operators that are keeping up with the pay. And I can't go into specifics once again, but I do the salary negotiation with folks. I come up with a strategy and I get the feedback afterwards when they're done negotiating. There are some insane deals out there right now in corporate aviation, but they're quiet. When people are getting, it's not like when Delta has a brand new contract and they post publicly, hey, look at our brand new contract and how amazing it is. In the corporate world, when folks are getting those types of contracts, they're keeping quiet about it.
Yeah. Well, and there's exceptions to every rule, right? And of course, there are some people that own airplanes that can pay whatever they feel like paying somebody, and it really doesn't affect anything. There are others that is not the most, and most that's not the case. But I think if you look at overall in the whole grand scheme of things, it's still going to be very difficult for corporate on average to keep up with where the airlines are at, just because of the economics of those two operations and how big those costs are spread amongst, if you look at it, the size of the airplane, how many people in the back and how much revenue it generates versus, and you look at one of the things I've always said too, is that with the pilot salaries going up like this, the salaries start to become a majority of the aircraft operation. It starts to eat such a big part of the budget. There's only so much that of a total operational budget of an airplane that can be eaten up by pilot salaries. It's just,
it's going to be really hard for a guy flying a Citation S2 to make $500,000 a year. Right.
Yeah. But
it's,
you know what though? What I did for a long time though, is because a lot of times in corporate flying, you do find yourself with a lot of time on your hands, a lot of extra time. And if you're productive with that time, you can certainly, close that gap. I sold real estate for a long time, and I hustled hard when I was not flying airplanes, selling houses. And there were years I made more money doing that than flying the airplane I was flying. And that certainly, but again, that's a quality of life. You mentioned in your question about quality of life, that shifts your quality of life, certainly. And there's a reason I don't do that anymore. So
that's right. It's a lot easier to show up. I think in general, I think the rule of thumb is, you're probably going to make more money at the airlines. Chris in the comments points out just the huge retirement contribution that you're going to get from most airlines. And he's not wrong. And there has to be other factors. I think, Max, you have a really good saying, what is your prime asset? Is it time or is it money? Is it health? Is it relationships? Those are all very important things. And for every person, that balance is going to be different. And so, what I think is really hard in the pilot journey, especially when you're starting out, is that you cannot conceptualize the job how it will affect your personal life later on when you're married, when you have kids, when there are things at home that you need to be at. And that is really hard, at least for me, was really hard to realize what was going to be important later in life. And then again, that may change again because, my kids will be gone at some point. And then I might want to do something different. So I think it's really hard to quantify one specific thing for one part in time. If that makes sense.
Well, and the other thing too with business aviation that's always been difficult is that you never know what to count on, long term. It's a lot of times corporate jobs, like we've said, is a job versus a career, and it's at the airlines, which is you don't ever know anything long term, but you can certainly have a better idea, I think, over the course of a career, kind of what you're looking at the airlines versus corporate. So, which certainly affects all things: money, time, retirement. All the things we mentioned.
Here's a perfect example from my son, posted via my wife. He goes, "I don't like it when you go to training. It would be cool if you didn't miss my birthday this year." I go to training every single year over his birthday, just the way it works. And so those are the things that you would never think about when you're 25, right? You would be thinking about, I want to fly to cool destinations, or I need to make the most money, whatever it is, and you're not thinking about your kids' birthdays and that kind of stuff. So lots to think about.
Look at Rob right here. He says, keep your 90-year-old self happy with whatever decision. Put it this way. Very few people at the end of their life have ever looked back and be like, God, I wish I would have just made more money.
Yeah. That's
very, very few people say that. That's actually like a statistic, because I was listening to this podcast I mentioned before about a guy that writes books about this stuff. But yeah, most people's regret at the end of their days is time related, not spending enough time with family, or not doing more, not traveling enough, things like that. So the younger people are forced to make these long-term decisions about their 40-year career at the airlines. I think that decision is more challenging because you just don't have as much reference to draw from. But
yeah, here's the conflict, right? Everybody knows money doesn't make you happy, but everyone wants the opportunity to prove that true. Right?
That's so true.
It's very true.
It's always easy to say, but
look, for most people, it is hard to stare. And look, I'm someone that does it, at least on the flying side of the house. I talk about it all the time. I give up about $300,000 a year for my quality of life. on my flying income. And I'm comfortable with that. I don't ever wake up and have any resentment. I don't have any regret. I don't ever look at any of the clients that we get hired and go, man, I'm really, I'm really ticked off that they're getting this amazing thing and I'm not. I'm clear with myself that that's what I want. For a lot of people, they've got to go try it to find out if they want it or not. Right?
Well,
you'd be surprised how many people are going to airlines and then leaving either to a different airline or they're getting hired at a legacy airline, going to a different legacy. They're getting hired at a legacy, going back to corporate, because until they get there, you don't actually know.
What we've tried to explain before is that it's easy to realize how much not being able to have your own airplane really means until you've had your own airplane or that boat or whatever you want. Mm-hmm. But the real thing about wealth and where it really crosses the boundaries when you don't have to stress about it. Like when you go to the gas station and you fill up your gas tank and you drive away and you're like, I wonder how much that was. Like you didn't even look because or you go to the grocery store, you just buy stuff at Costco and you don't really think about what it's going to cost because it's food. It's
like an Iberian ham.
Yeah. As I told my wife, this is not a want, it is a need.
Max was carving a dried ham in his living room for a month during COVID.
That's a different story, Dylan.
Yeah. All right. Anyway.
But anyway, yeah, you're going to reach that level of wealth flying airplanes at some point where you don't have to worry about, how much gas you put in your truck or whatever. The rest of the stuff, it's a diminishing return at the end of the day. So,
yeah,
easy to say, hard to grasp.
It is, and I'll tell you what. She says it was. Oops, sorry. That ham was delicious, though. I will.
Right?
What's crazy? But I'll tell you what. Here is an experience that I had. James, you had it. Max, you had it too. Young in our career, we had the opportunity to fly at regional airlines with old pilots that had been in the game for a long time, and you do get to look at people and you're like, I don't know if the vast majority of these guys that I fly with, if that's who I want to be when I'm in my 60s. I flew at American Eagle where there was a lot of older captains there. You might not have had that same experience at Colgan, James, but I think that there is an eye-opening of that. Dude, like, whoa, is this my path?
The cool thing for me was getting to actually fly with guys that were on the union committee during the Eastern strike, the guys that were in management at New York Air, the guy, like you get to fly with these people that live through the ups and the downs of the industry. Right. And you start to hear, hey, what does that look like? And it helps you start to figure out for yourself what actually really matters.
Yeah.
Right now, everything's skyrocketing. And so it's really hard to be level-headed and not go, dude, I want to get on that rocket ship, right? But ultimately, when you get there, right, you get hired by that legacy or wherever it is you want to work, and now you're 6 months in, you're a year in, you're 2 years in, and the novelty wears off. That's when you really find out, hey, did I actually really want to do this or not? And the money doesn't fix that.
The dog never thought he was going to catch the bus, right, James?
Precisely correct. What do you do when you catch the bus?
Exactly.
Like, maybe I'll put nicer rims on it.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Should we put out a last call for any more questions? We've got a couple more that we're going to hit. But if anyone that's tuning in live,
no, it's too late. Let's go to the rapid fire.
Should we go rapid fire here? Okay. If you've got a burning question, get it in quick. We're going to go rapid fire. This is lightning round. These are short answers. Here's the first one. Oh, this is a fun one. What's the funniest ATC communication you've ever heard during flight?
Yo, that's not fair, man. I've eviscerated some controllers.
Yeah, because you don't have to worry about consequences.
Precisely correct. And I'm going to leave it at that.
It's mostly the interactions with Volaris at either O'Hare or in New York.
My favorite, one of my favorites.
Hello.
Yeah, exactly. One of the South American carriers. I was in LAX and he completely blew a crossing restriction, and the controller goes, "Hey, Volaris, are you going to make 200 at the fix?" And the guy comes back and he goes, "Sometimes we make it, sometimes we don't."
I remember you telling that story.
So, Yeah, there's so many good ones. The other funny one I heard this one time, also out of LAX in the turboprop, a lot of Alaska Airlines flying around, and guy was lost and taxiing around the airport, and finally the guy goes, "See the white airplane with the picture of my mother-in-law on the tail? Follow him."
That's Alaska.
So
That's pretty funny.
so good. Okay, next rapid fire question. Got a few of these with the similar theme. Need low time pilot job ideas because I want to skip flight instructing.
Yeah, so there's a couple of operators. I'll give some folks some names that hire folks sub 1,000. How far below 1,000 is going to vary. Typically speaking, that like 500 to 800 hours makes you more competitive for these. But start taking a look at Contour, Cutter, Grandview, JSX, Silver, Cape Air, Tradewind, PlaneSense, Castle, if you want to fly a Saab 340 that I used to fly.
Yeah.
And then Mountain Air Cargo. Are a couple of different operators that folks can take a look at.
That
Wow,
was
you
a
just
tapestry of
ripped those
low-time
off.
jobs you just
Well,
weaved there. James.
we
That's
have a
impressive.
lot of clients that don't want to flight instruct, and we work with them through both the networking and the interview prep side to help them get those jobs. Because the other component to this that folks don't realize is the biggest things that people struggle with in that first job that's not flight instructing is instrument skills.
Not with skydiving, bro. What if you drop skydivers,
exactly,
pipeline patrol, fish counting? What else?
Yeah. But most pilots they've really honestly done the same 6 instrument approaches that are within 20 miles of their local airport, right? They haven't done arrivals, they haven't done departures, they haven't done climb and descend via, they haven't had to meet speed restrictions, they haven't had to do any of that stuff. And so now you go into a Contour or a JSX or something like that, and things are moving at 5 miles a minute, and their instrument skills aren't there. So you really, once you get that commercial, you really want to spend that next 250 hours really beefing up your instrument skills, reading different types of approach plates, departure and arrival procedures, so on and so forth. So we work with them to make sure they're prepared, because the last thing we want to do is help someone get a job at a place that they're going to fail out of training, right? It's when you get that first job at 500 or 750 hours that you're going to go fly a jet or a turboprop, you want to be ready for it. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and Chris brings up a good comment. He says, "Why skip flight instruction? It's a great way to learn what you know, and what you don't know." And I mean, look, if you can flight instruct, do it. It's gonna suck. It's not gonna be fun, but it's gonna make you a way better pilot. I promise you, it's gonna make you a better pilot.
We were all so very surprised at the end of flight instructing. I think most people that have done it were very surprised at how much they learned.
Yes,
even though you're teaching all the stuff you just learned. It doesn't seem like you would. But
I was shocked at how useful those lazy 8s were in the real world.
It's incredible, right?
Listen,
yeah,
I just did 8s on pylons the other day. It's awesome.
I think you're
okay, next lightning question. Where do you all see the regional airline model in the next decade? Well, just quickly, just one sentence, James, if you could just quickly summarize
if you could just sum that up real quick.
The regional airline model will not look the same 24 months from now than it does today. I mean, you can already see it with what they're doing with SkyWest Charter. I mean, it just paying folks $40,000 a month to be like, it's just not sustainable. I don't know what it's going to look like, but it's going to have to transform. Whether that means they're going to cut service, they're going to upgauge the airplanes, they're going to bring regionals onto legacy airline seniority lists. I don't know how they're going to do it, right? But the way the model looks right now is not the way it's going to look in 24 to 36 months from now.
100% agree.
And unless the plan of the model is to keep parking airplanes and not fly them because you don't have enough pilots.
Right. You never know.
Yeah.
Okay. This is an interesting one. No job right now. Waiting on a class date at AA in July. What should I do until then?
Start reading some books, man. Go out and fish. I mean, if you got the class date, you don't have a job. Because enjoy the downtime.
Yeah. Put it this way. The next time you might find yourself in the situation, it's not going to be so rosy, because it would be as a result of a furlough or something. So use the time to do something.
That's not
better
100%
yourself.
true. He could have a huge gap waiting on IOE. He could luck out a second time.
Well, there could be another COVID with
Yeah.
those extended
Yeah.
time off
Yeah.
programs where they paid you not to show up anymore.
Yeah.
Those were a pretty good deal too. So never say never, I suppose.
Okay, we got a good one to close out the show. This is Brian wants best crash pad stories.
Dude, the best ones we can't talk about.
Yeah.
We'll just say that.
Guys dressing up in pilot uniforms and going down to the local hotel with a bag in their hand so they can eat free breakfast that they couldn't afford when regional airline pilots weren't paid anything.
Brian was my old roommate, and we used to live right below a crash pad. So we had some. You know the stories. You were in them.
That's why he's asking for you to tell them. He wants to protect the
exactly.
innocent.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay, this one's very serious, guys. We have an airman with a broken heart. He wrote in, he said, I'm not making this up. I had a long-term girlfriend who just broke up with me for an F-22 demo pilot because he inspires her and I'm just a charter pilot. I get it. Fighter pilots are dope, but damn. He works for a fractional and can move anywhere. God, they think he wants to get out of town. What should our young heartbroken pilot do? He has the ability to live anywhere. He works for fractional.
Consider himself lucky.
Yeah.
That's true. You dodged a bullet there.
Yeah.
Could have given up 50% of your net worth if it wasn't just dating.
It's true.
Yeah.
Good point. I mean, you got to go somewhere where the odds are in your favor. Listen, here's what I would say. Go to Charleston, South Carolina. That's my advice.
Call it the fractional and ask if you can become part of their demo team. I don't know.
San Diego's not bad.
Yeah. San Diego could work.
Go. We're biased, but Phoenix is pretty good.
Phoenix is good. I think I don't think you can go wrong. Listen, my wife went to school in Charleston, South Carolina. It's the exact opposite of Embry-Riddle. There's like 11 girls for every guy, and I'm not even making that up. It's unbelievable.
Yeah,
so that's my advice. And I'm pretty sure that's a domicile city in on the NetJets list. So
you know what they say, Dylan. The best way to get over a girl is right.
Bid for a new city at the next preferential bid window.
Oh, I guess that works too.
Yeah, that's right. All right, Chris is closing us out with the best advice of all. He says, "Tell him to apply for legacies, get on and make more than an F-22 pilot will in his entire career. That's a win." All right, there you go. I guess it's just
Chris might. We
Chris,
might need to reach out to Chris. Chris might be welcomed on as the newest member of the Diamond Dogs here pretty soon. He's very engaged.
Exactly.
I like this.
Chris, shoot us an email. We're gonna have to send you some swag for your competition. Here it is. Chris is probably Chat GPT that Joel's working behind the scenes.
It's my wife created an alter ego that she's feeding Chat GPT. Stole our premium login.
I love it. Well, this was a lot of fun. This was our first live broadcast. We really appreciate everyone that's took the time to join us and participate. Love all the comments. We still have tons of flight advice we didn't even get to, so we're going to have to do this again. Of course, you can always get a hold of James O'Neill by visiting ravencareers.com and clicking on the contact button. I think they can just jump right onto your calendar there, right, James?
Yep, they click contact us to get right on my calendar.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, we will do this again. If you have more for flight advice, you can just shoot us an email, info@215podcast.com. We'll try and tackle it with the Diamond Dogs on an upcoming episode. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Just
There's
remember,
no
until
words
next
there.
time.
To play us out. What does that mean, to play us out? I don't know what that means, to play us out. What does that mean? To end the show? Yeah.
Thank you, Bill O'Reilly. That's a real cliffhanger there. Until next
We
time.
did it live.
Remember.
Flexibility is the key to air power, even when it's
See you,
live.
everybody.
See you next time.
Thanks, guys.
We'll do it live. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.